Um, Virginia Woolf, obviously one of the most influential writer of the 20th century, and one of the particularly interesting things about Woolf from the point of view of literary history is that her life has become as famous as her writings. Biographies of Woolf have always sold very well, and they interweave with interpretations of her novels. And she herself engaged in a great deal of self-representation through diaries and letters, which after her death were collected by her family and her spouse, Leonard Woolf, was a very active literary executor. He had a lot of responsibilities on him. And gradually, over the decades, she died in 1941, and from the 1950s to the 1970s, there was a real sort of steady stream of influential Woolf primary sources coming out. And there's still a few things unpublished, but we've certainly made a lot of progress in making just about everything available to the public. And the diaries, of course, are very essential to this project of the public getting to know Virginia Woolf and her literary reputation being cemented through an ideas of herself as an individual. She kept diaries all her life, from when she was a teenage girl, all written by hand. And they have been, as I say, the basis for what one could say this cynically, the Virginia Woolf industry, but I mean that sort of affectionately, just this whole collection of memorabilia and production of text through which she's known to the public. The first edition of her diary comes out in 1953, and it is called A Writer's Diary. It is edited by her husband, very carefully edited. It's only a small volume compared to the overall nature of her works. And Leonard Woolf put it out specifically to have her known better as a writer. He didn't want the family history and her personal life to be put on display through the diary, which is understandable. He's her husband as well as her literary executor. Leonard Woolf says of this first edition, he says, "I've been carefully through the 26 volumes of diary, and I have extracted and now published in this volume practically everything which referred to her own writing." And he says, "The book throws light upon Virginia Woolf's intentions, objects, and methods as a writer. It gives an unusual psychological picture of artistic production from within." And but he doesn't say, but as he points out, it is not a view of her personality or her private life. This is a very heavy job of editing that he's done to get one volume out of 27, and just by a very fixed point that we will just put what Virginia wrote about writing. He said, "In editing the diary, I was in some doubt whether to indicate omissions. In the end, I decided not to do so as a general rule. The omissions and the dots would have been so continual as to worry the reader. This leads me to revert to what I said above. The reader must remember that what is printed in this volume is only a very small portion of the diaries, and that the extracts were embedded in a mass of matter unconnected with Virginia Woolf's writing. Unless this is constantly borne in mind, the book will give a very distorted view of her life and her character." So there you have a book about Virginia Woolf by Virginia Woolf, but which has certain inbuilt limitations of understanding because it is severely edited down. But then, of course, most volumes of diaries which we read are edited down. It was an understandable way to introduce this to the public. That is from the frontispiece and the back of the 1953 edition. I have a copy of it. That's my own copy. And it's illustrated with maps of London and the village in the Ask Valley in Sussex where she lived. There are no photographs produced with the diary. So, but including maps was more common thing in the 1950s than it is now. So this is in some ways a typical piece of work for that time. Just going back to the cover, It has VB in the corner, and that is, the cover design is by Vanessa Bell, her sister, who was an artist. And all of Virginia Woolf's early productions are very much encased in this cultural, artistic world of the people around her. And that's both a good resource for her historian, but in some ways can produce a few challenges in interpretations. The copy that I have of her diary is by this person, Professor Alfred Rouse. And I bought his copy because I was interested in his view of Virginia Woolf. It was sold when his estate was distributed, and I managed to get my hands on it. And it's a very interesting and enlightening view of how Rouse regarded Virginia Woolf. He went all through the diary annotating it in pencil. So this is a study in marginalia here. And Rouse was apparently very aware of Virginia and her set. And he himself was an English broadcaster, historian, also wrote for the press and popular writing. And he was a bit of he was from Cornwall and very interested in Cornish culture. And he also wrote a lot of learned stuff about Shakespeare and so forth. But he was a kind of person who liked to be in the public eye. He didn't mind speaking his mind. And he developed a reputation as the years went on as a kind of an old fogey. He's one of those people who became very conservative during the Cold War. His attitude towards Virginia Woolf and her set was quite inimical, and this comes out in a lot of his comments. There she is writing about her feelings on the start of January, and he says, all too self-conscious, bad for writing. And he puts it again here, too much. And other parts in the columns he writes, shut up. And he comments on her marriage, saying that sometimes saying that Leonard Woolf is an angel in the house, and at other times saying he's a self-obsessed bore. Rouse should talk. There's also some fonder mentions which indicate, in fact, how closely he viewed the couple. She talks about walking up Charing Cross Road, and he writes at the bottom of that thing, he says, I watched L&V walking up Charing Cross Road with Spaniel. So he certainly, I'm very aware of them. The annotations, I think, on this book show how, as a figure during that era, I'm speaking of the 1950s and 1970s, the era of the Cold War, and a very different cultural landscape now, of how a conservative English literary figure and critic saw Woolf. I'm also very interested in Professor Rouse's view of Virginia Woolf, because one thing that confirmed to me when I read the marginalia is how closely he concentrated on her. Although it's a friendly mention, I think that thing of I watched them walking up Charing Cross Road almost sounds like a stalker, doesn't it? It's sort of very, very full on. Rouse himself wrote a book which was published in 1984, and I don't know, it's a collection of his short stories. I do not know when the stories were written. That's not maddeningly, that's not included in, but the anthology appeared in 84, and the stories were apparently written in the 1960s and 70s. Night at the Khan, from which it takes its title, is probably Rouse's most famous short story. It's about the death of an intellectual woman who comes to Cornwall and is struck with a traditional witchcraft curse. This is in some ways typical Cornish story. This story, Night at the Khan, is famous because it is said to be based on the death of Carr Cox, who died in 1938. And she was a friend of Virginia Woolf. And the death of Carr Cox is one of these long-running, slightly mystic controversies. The interesting thing about Night at the Khan to me is that he gives the Carr Cox character, guess what he calls her? Virginia. And he makes a whole series of mentions of her, descriptions of her death, which mingle references to Virginia's death with that of Carr. I think it is partly a story about Virginia Woolf, but I've not seen any critic address it as such. And that is something myself I am pursuing. And I felt that getting that copy of the diary was very interesting and very productive to enlarging my understanding on that on my research. Well, going on from there, a 5-volume set of the diaries came out with Hogarth Press from 1977 to 1984. And this is a very beautiful set, very beautifully put out and printed and etc. You can all see that there. And this set is what most Woolf scholars think of as the diaries. It is more complete than anything that had appeared in the meantime between 53 and 77. These diaries, these particular volumes of the diaries, as I say, came out from the Hogarth Press, which was at that time still owned by Virginia Woolf's family. And it's very much an in-house curating of her reputation. The editor is Anne Olivia Bell, and she was married to Quentin Bell. Quentin Bell was the nephew of Virginia Woolf, and he wrote the first biography of her, which came out in 1972, and it was an authorised biography, and it really helped to take Virginia Woolf's reputation to a new level in the 1970s. So Quentin Bell was the family biographer, and extremely, both he and his wife, who edited the diaries, very aware of their responsibility to their family and their circle as much as to Virginia herself, and always, as families will, putting the best gloss on things. I'm not saying, of course, that their works weren't perfectly scholarly, but I think that it would be fair to say there was a very strong tint there, as I say, virtually of the family memoir. Anne Olivia Bell wrote herself a long article, sort of monograph on editing the diaries. And throughout, one can see that she has a tremendous amount of respect both for her husband, Quentin Bell, who knew Virginia Woolf well, and of course, Leonard Woolf as the sort of virtually founding father of the dynasty. All of these works, I would say, although very adequate in their careful collectioning of the documents and the annotations, etc., all very good. There is then, from about 1975 onwards, some public, in the scholarly circles, some reaction against the Quentin Bell industry around Virginia Woolf, with feminists and socialists and other people disputing the view of Virginia Woolf put out by her family, which is associated with this set of books. And they all, of course, seeking meanings to the life of Virginia, who by the 1970s is becoming quite a distant character, and therefore all the more important that she be represented by texts. In the Virginia Woolf industry, a very big figure is Professor Stanford Rosenbaum. He was a Canadian scholar, and very different from Professor Rouse. He was a very softly spoken and modest person, apparently, and very kind and cooperative to other scholars. And he wrote the Companion to Bloomsbury book, a book called A Companion to Bloomsbury, which came out in 1993, and he was the editor, and it was it's a very authoritative work, and he did a lot of other work as well as writing himself some stuff about Bloomsbury Group in Virginia. He was very active in editing other people's work and making sure that all the quotations were right, everything was put in place and so forth. It's obviously a very hardworking and a very trusted scholar. And of course, he has a copy of the diaries, and he makes a lot of use of them. And that's the one that comes out in 1980, at the end of the 1970s. It's I should say that this edition was published from 1977 to 84. Yeah. So this one comes out in 1980 and is a review copy owned by Professor Rosenbaum, and it is now owned by me. When his estate was dispersed, his set of the diaries, which were very nicely kept, were put on the market, and I managed to get them. That would have been about 10 or 11 years ago, and I bought them from the book dealer who gave me the provenance. And I remember when they arrived, I said to the person who was with me, who's probably pretty used to seeing me unpacking books at my desk, I said, "Oh, they cost me hundreds." I said, "They cost me hundreds." I felt that I'd been a bit extravagant. But as a matter of fact, it turned out to be an excellent investment, because you should see the prices that the first edition of the diaries go for now, complete sets in good condition like that. And this is not just a first edition. It is a review copy. You see that? And there's Professor Rosenbaum has signed it as his copy in Toronto. And now, having Professor Rosenbaum's copies of the diaries is really interesting for me, because it enables, again, one to trace the historiography around Woolf, because like Professor Rouse, he annotated the books in pencil a lot. He was very careful of them, obviously, but this is his work as a scholar, so he writes in the margins in lead pencil. And he's always noting things. His comments are, of course, quite different from Rouse's. Well, nearly everyone's are. He doesn't get into personal, but he's always saying another image from her life again, and analogy, and so forth. Sometimes one can't work out what he's writing to himself, and again he writes note as to what will go into his larger projects. So that's very interesting, and as I say, it enables one to see how at the end of the 20th century, how a person who was very dominant in Virginia Woolf's in the field of Virginia Woolf studies approached her diaries. And so these diaries, I feel that the marginalia is very important with these, but also when you look at the diaries themselves, if you trace carefully from the first one that came out in 53 to one in 84, the annotations and the selections that are made are very telling about the interests of the people around Virginia, who continued to find her to be, she was very central to their lives even long after she died. I think that there was an attempt to downplay family conflicts, and wouldn't that be natural? I think any of us, if we had a famous writer in the family, would do so. I think also that there could have been, when I was looking at Professor Rosenbaum's notes, I thought, everyone, even he who was very fastidious and note everything, should probably note the financial aspects more, because she had a greater earning power of anyone else in her family, and that, of course, that dominates family relationships to a great deal. However, now in 2023, we have a new edition of the diaries. Something has finally come along to replace the beautiful multicoloured set. It is again 5 volumes. It's come out by Granta Books in an e-edition. This is the first time her diaries have come out as an e-book. It's surprising that it has taken this long. The e-edition of the diaries did not come out with the Hogarth Press, although it still exists as an imprint. Hogarth Press was owned by Lennon and Virginia Woolf. After both of their deaths, it was acquired by Chatto and Windus, who kept it as an imprint, and then the Chatto and Windus was acquired by Random House Books. Presumably, they could have brought out the diary had they wished. Well, it would depend on who owns the copyrights and the heirs and so forth. For some reason, it's not them that puts out this e-edition, it's Granta Books. There would be some story to that, but I'm not sure what it is. And the Granta Books edition in 2023 has created a great splash. It has been very well received. It is an important edition. And so what we have here is a far more complete edition. Various things such as the Ascham notebook and some earlier diary writings when she is a teenager are to be made and integrated in with the rest of the text. There's much more complete footnoting of, because just through observation over the years, people have learned more about what things she was referring to. And The technology of the ebook is so distinctly different that we are robbed of these marginalia notes, which are so interesting in the old collections of the books, but we have gains in some ways. Of course, we've got word search, and you have click on references and many things that you can do with an ebook which are cumbersome with the printed text. Another thing is that we do have some possibility through Kindle books of communicating with other readers of the books, because they have a facility called note-taking, where you can see where, if you opt into it, you can see where other people have underlined sections or written notes at the end. So in that sense, readers of the e-edition still can communicate with each other in a more, the technology is different, but the thing of underlining, aligning and scribbling comments in the margin is with us still. And it will probably go on affecting how we read Virginia Woolf and producing new meanings. Overall, as a literary historian, I'm very, very affirmative of the historical value of Virginia Woolf's diaries. I think I don't grumble. They were very slow to appear in a complete form, but I think that that's inevitable when these are writings about people who are still alive. And the interesting thing is we now know more about the diaries, but we should be humble in assuming that we necessarily have a definitive or more expansive view of Virginia. As time progresses, it both destroys and creates new meanings of Virginia as a public figure and a writer. We gain more access to the text she wrote. We lose access to the cultural context and the familial and circles in which she lived. So all of these go forward as the importance of the diaries, and it will be really interesting to see if the letters also collected letters come out in an e-edition, which I certainly hope they will soon. Thank you.